Greetings, Commanders. There's been a flurry of changes to the game, to the war, to Guardian modules, to a lot of things pertaining to everything that's happening in and around the Thargoid War. Unfortunately, all we've been communicated around those changes is a very cursory update in the patch notes with 3 lines saying, hey, we changed this, we changed that, this is going to work like this is going to work like that. But with very little reasoning around why is it happening, why is it changing, what's going to kind of ultimately change, how is it going to affect gameplay, and more importantly, why is this being done? So I thought I'd make a little video to actually explain those changes, why they're happening, what was the rationale introduced behind their introduction, and how they're going to meaningful change or no change or fail to change gameplay as we understand it. So let's start with the Thargoid War update changes. So first and foremost, a while back, they changed the weighting and they changed the curve around which the cost of liberating occupied systems went up based on the distance to Titan to fix a fundamental problem that the war had. The war was being fought with Thargoid sampling, with armies of Type 9s that were using collector limpet controllers and research limpet controllers to sample Thargoid scouts over and over and over again in a given system, because that was by far the most efficient method to obtain more progression. And obviously, that was not a particularly fun activity. We made that case over and over again to Frontier until they finally realized, this is actually how people are fighting the war. It's really not the way we intended. So let's make some changes. Let's make combat more rewarding. And let's also reduce the cost of liberating the innermost systems and increase the cost of liberating the outermost systems in a way that balances things out somewhat better. That change worked. It worked well. It working as intended. The balancing seems to be pretty effective. So kudos to Frontier Developments for that change, because it is exactly what we asked for, and it is something that has made the game a lot better. With that change, a few things also happened. What happened is the fact that we ended up clearing alerts at an incredibly fast pace. The problem with clearing systems in an alert state is that they will not progress to their invasion state. If alert systems do not progress to invasion states, then all the gameplay pertaining to fighting Thargoids at surface ports and fighting Thargoids at space stations just goes away, because it doesn't ever going to happen. So they just recently made another change to say, okay, well, we're not going to have alerts in populated systems anymore. We're going to go straight to invasion. So that means burning ports that we need to rescue ships from, rescue passengers from, and it means anti-Xeno combat zones at surface ports and at stations. Furthermore, they said they will also create situations where there's going to be ports under attack in occupied counter-strike systems, which is a novelty, which, by the way, is currently not working. Expect a patch to fix that further, because right now, at least from the appearance from yesterday, it did not appear to work as intended at all. That gives an additional avenue for people to fight at planetary-based anti-combat zones. Why planetary? And in the patch notes, they explicitly said that they privileged planetary combat zones instead of the station-based combat zone. Why is that? There's a couple of very specific reasons why that is the case. Well, first of all, planetary ports have interceptors that spawn without their swarms, which makes combat at planetary ports a lot easier and a lot less dangerous than combat in space, and thus a lot more accessible. A lot more people were going to actively enjoy it if it's combat at planetary ports instead of combat in space. The second reason, and probably the main reason why that is the case, is that rotating stations like Corelli or orbital station, or whatever the Ocellus stations, they have a kind of variant of the Corelli stations, have a bug where when a commander docks and switches to having rotational correction activated, all the Thargoids outside of a station start spinning uncontrollably for everybody else, which makes it really funny and awkward and completely dysfunctional. And it's a bug that they haven't fixed. So doing more station-based anti-combat zones would make that bug incredibly evident and ruin the experience for everybody, because you cannot really reliably hit spinning Thargoids at all. Trust me, we've tried. So that's the reasoning, and that's what's been happening around the changes to the overall Thargoid war mechanics. Now, let's move forward a little bit and let's talk about the Guardian modules and the changes to the Guardian weapons and Guardian weapon engineering for the anti-Guardian field effect that have just recently been introduced. So, first and foremost, I think not many people even know that it is now possible to engineer Guardian weapons at Ram-Tah so that they become resistant to the so-called anti-Guardian field effect. The anti-Guardian field effect is present in all systems where Thargoid Titans are present. It is also present when you engage an Orthrus in any alert or equivalent system, and it enacts an anti-Guardian field as a defense mechanism. Similarly, it is present at Spire sites when Orthrus defend themselves. And finally, it is present at high and very high combat zones, and more generally, when glaives show up. Thargoid glaive hunters have the ability to also fire an anti-Guardian field. So there's an incredibly wide range of scenarios where using weapons that are resistant to the anti-Guardian field effect is convenient or desirable. Now, with great fanfare, Frontier released the updated novelty that Guardian weapons were now engineerable to be resistant to such effect, and made the engineering available at the engineer Ram-Tah. The challenge with that is that it came with two big caveats, which Frontier has just recently tried to address, but I think they actually missed the point, and we'll get to that in a moment. The first caveat is that they came with a 20% damage penalty. So you could engineer the weapons to be resistant, but not use 20% of the damage. So you kind of get into a trade-off situation of saying, hey, I'm going to make my weapons worse just to use in a select few situations. So now I kind of need to have two sets of weapons, like one for situations where I might need anti-Guardian field resistance and one for situations where I don't, and have to swap them out on my builds. Incredibly annoying, really inconvenient. Why am I doing this? I'm not going to bother. That's one rationale as to why people were not using anti-Guardian field engineering. Second, and arguably even more prominent issue is that the anti-Guardian field engineering effect is actually pretty expensive in terms of materials. You need one material from a Thargoid Titan, you need one material from either the graveyard of a Titan or from the caustic zone, which is a caustic crystal. And then the hardest of all is you need a material that is dropped from Thargoid revenants on site, which however you need to collect with an SRV. So it's very, very difficult to acquire that material. That material is a tactical core chip. And not surprisingly, very few people have gone through the bothersome process of gathering enough materials to engineer those weapons. And that's the second reason why those engineerings are more prominent. There's actually a third one, if you want, which is the fact that the best weapons, best Guardian weapons, are not the standard weapons, but rather they are the pre-engineered so-called salvation weapons that are available at Prospex Beep and the Emboni system after you acquire a dedicated permit and purchase them for materials. And those weapons cannot be engineered for the anti-Guardian field resistance because they are already engineered or pre-engineered with their updated stats. That would have been fixed if Frontier Development had made the anti-Guardian field effect an experimental, which I thought would have been perfect for the kind of effect that the weapon receives. But they didn't. They made it a dedicated G1 engineering, and that conflicts with the pre-engineering that the Salvation weapon have, making the Salvation weapon incompatible with anti-Guardian field effect. So unless they God-handed and say, well, now Salvation also figured out what Ram-Tah figured, and all the pre-engineered weapons will have anti-Guardian field resistance, which would be a major boost. Well, unless that happens, you're not going to see widespread adoption because, again, all the standard Guardian weapons have broadly been power crept by the so-called Salvation ones, at least the shards and Gauss, plasma charges in particular. Now, what Frontier Development has just done with the update that is going live today is they've said, Ram-Tah has actually figured a few things out. The damage penalty is now gone. Most likely because they realized that the adoption numbers for the anti-Guardian field resistant weapons were so low. And I believe they presume that because of the damage penalty that those weapons came from. So they said, okay, well, let's remove that damage penalty. Let's remove that trade-off so people don't have to carry variants of those weapons that they need to swap back and forth. And that should drive adoption up. I think they missed the point entirely, though, in that the main reason that weapons aren't being engineered is the material cost, and it is the fact that better weapons exist, and that most people that are doing advanced combat today are actually using, if they have access to them, the Salvation weapons to begin with. So I actually think they're going to see maybe a little bit of an uptick, but they're not going to see the kind of change that I think they were intending to go with this recent change. In order to see that, they need to add the anti-guardian field effect of Salvation weapons, or they need to reduce the material cost and eliminate at least the tactical core chip requirement, which is an incredibly difficult material to acquire. So that's what's going on with the game, and that's more of a rationale and reasoning behind some of the changes that are happening. Hopefully this is helpful in sort of demystifying a little bit of what's the recent changes in the game that aren't always explained to you. And with that, glory to mankind, Commander Meccan, over and out.